I was just checking to see if she had texted me, and I do not have any texts. Maybe I should clarify.
Okay. All appears to be working.
So we're live.
You are live, Mr. Mayor.
All right, well, I'll call to order this joint URA, SHA, and Council Boards and Commissions Appointment Committee for Monday, September 12th, 2024. President Hoy.
Nishioka?
Nordyke.
All right, first up, we have good governance update from Moss Adams. Danny, you kicking that off, or are we going straight to Danny Rose?
Danny, why don't we go straight to you?
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much for having me join this meeting today. I'm Annie Rose Favreau from the Moss Adams team. And what I'm hoping to do in this first bit of your meeting is revisit the governance assessment. Because as you may remember, we performed a governance assessment, made some recommendations, and now we are in the phase of wanting to move forward with some of this work. And some of those recommendations, what we're going to do is be bringing them to this group for review and discussion. So we have a series of meetings coming up with you on this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I'll follow along. All right, can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, so a little bit more context. As you may all remember, for that governance assessment, we were looking at a few different pieces. The first being the city charter, doing a review there to bring that up to date, or to identify opportunities to bring that up to date and make sure that it's serving you all well. And then we also looked at your governance groups. So your commissions, your boards, all of those groups that help support the work of the city, as well as neighborhood associations. So in terms of taking the assessment and actually implementing some of these pieces, we've broken our implementation approach into 3 separate streams. One that is really focused on those governance groups, one focused on neighborhood associations, and one focused on the city charter updates. So for today's conversation and with this group, what we're really going to be looking at are the governance group recommendations. So as I mentioned today, we're going to go through a couple of the topics that were recommended, get your input for discussion. We're going to have a series of other meetings with you here. So if there's anything that we discussed today that there's not, a specific decision to be reached at, if we need more information, we can do all of that as well. But for today's conversation, what we're hoping to focus on were these 5 topics. So these are 5 of the recommendation areas that came up in the report. And we want to go through each one and basically share, what the recommendation was. We have some questions for you to help inform. But the goal of all of this is ultimately this group deciding what we want to bring forward to the full city council for potential adoption later on. So that is what we are aiming toward. Any questions on any of those pieces before we start jumping in and looking at each one of these topics?
No.
Great. All right. So the very first recommendation that we wanted to bring up was the idea of, can we establish a common set of bylaws for governance groups, or at least have a common framework where we say this is the minimum that we expect every governance group to have in their bylaws, and here are some of the areas that we would have some flexibility. And so what we noted in the assessment was that not all groups currently operate with bylaws. There's a wide variety in terms of what the information is that is included in those bylaws. So the question that we wanted to bring forward to you all here is, first and foremost, do you see value in requiring a common set of bylaws? Is that something that this group would be interested in? And if so, we would be curious to get your input on if there's anything in particular that you would want to see incorporated into those established bylaws. We have a set of the standard things that we often see in bylaws, but certainly wanted to hear from this group as well. But I'd like to open up that first question of, does this seem like a worthwhile endeavor to attempt to create this common set and bring a little bit more consistency here?
I think so.
I think so, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That would be a good goal.
Great. All right. So if we are agreed, we are interested in this common set, as I said, generally how this could work, and this is something that we could bring back to you at the follow-up meeting. We could bring an example of what this could look like here. Generally, we have obviously things like the name and purpose, anything to do with the membership of the particular group. But we also want to have things around meeting procedures, accessibility considerations, and some of those things are even as simple as, do we have our name tags up? How are members of the public interacting? Those types of things. Behavioral norms, and then any annual planning and reporting, which is another topic we'll get to. But within that, I'm curious if the group has anything in particular that you would be hoping to see out of these bylaws or added to these bylaws beyond just making sure that they're consistent and we're taking that into account across the groups.
Well, I think drilling down on like meeting procedures, I think is important because I think we have some real inconsistency with procedures. Like, is there a public comment period at every one of these? Is there not? Or, you know, are they public meetings that are noticed? Are they not? You know, those kinds of things. Or do we stream them? Do we not? Do we, you know, what are the, I just think some guidelines around that and just some consistency, I think would be really helpful.
I would note is on the last point, as far as streaming, when they're supposed to stream, we have a administrative policy and procedure that was adopted about 2 months ago that does standardize that for all the board and commissions.
Okay, is it being followed?
Hope so.
So that's fairly recently. Okay, good. I didn't know that.
And that's something that we could reference to make sure everyone is aware of that and that it's built in.
Yeah.
Annie, can you remind me, when you mean governance groups, what's the universe of groups we're talking about here?
Yes, great question. So primarily we are looking at commissions, boards, task forces. This may also get into committee work if as needed, but I would say in particular the commissions and the boards were some of those areas that we were seeing that really wide range of in terms of what's there currently.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand. Thank you.
Would it include advisory groups or, okay, because sometimes they'll be shorter term or only done every few years, but it's still,
Yeah,
we still have to appoint them.
yes, and I think that that's something that we want to take into account is if there might be some variation that we would expect for some of those time limited groups for sure. And I think that that's something that we'd want to build in is noting that there's going to be flexibility for different situations. But ideally, there would be a set of things that would really apply to every group regardless of their particular structure, including all of those advisory task forces, that type of thing.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to
Alright.
highlight the last bullet point, annual planning / reporting. I like the idea of having some sort of end report from all these groups.
Yeah.
As an opportunity, not just for we as a council to understand what's going on, but for them to reflect on the past year and think, what kind of performance metrics did we meet this year? What did we accomplish this year? And if you know that you have to produce an annual report where people are like, okay, what did you accomplish this year, Parks and Rec, or what did you accomplish, Public Art Commission? I think some of these groups already do a great job with their annual report, but if they know that we would like to see what results, like what are the tangible results that they can point to, I think that will help empower them and also hold them accountable because we're using a lot of our staff time to staff up all these committees. We want to make sure it's a good use of everybody's time.
I am going to say you are 2 steps ahead because that is our next topic here, which is fantastic. So anything else on bylaws before we shift over to talking about annual planning and reporting?
I guess just one additional question, Annie Rose. So you're going to establish bylaws that fit, that are purpose for the entire like groups or boards and commissions, but then from there may be some that have subcategories that need to have you know, a different set of recommendations of who gets appointed, or that would then be added on specifically for that board or commission, correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. So we'd have, here's the baseline standard that we need to see across everything, but then here are the areas that would be adapted for every specific group as well, or areas where they could add on as needed.
Okay. And then also you have here membership size, criteria. Again, some of that seems to be different. And so that would that be part of that amended portion of the bylaws, so that you'd have a standard, and then from there, if you needed more or fewer, you would have that adjusted on the kind of the second set of bylaws.
Yep, exactly. So that's a section that might, some of these, it is codified already in terms of membership. We might just be referencing, city code in that space. Others, we would really want to use that section to fully build out what are all the membership size criteria and all of those pieces. So that is one where I imagine that would have to be, what would be consistent is saying we need everyone to have this section. The section, though, would look different group by group.
So just to be the lawyer in the room, the criteria for membership, the number of members, their terms, all that kind of stuff, that's set up either in the code or in the resolution that creates the
So
board
that's
of
not in
commission.
the bylaws.
So we put them in the bylaws so they know it's there, but
Okay.
the authority for that is through the code, through council, not through something that the committee could change on its own, or the board of commission can change on its own.
All right, thank you.
All right. Well, then I'm going to move us forward on this. So our next steps here will be to come back with the framework for what this can look like now, knowing that this group is interested in moving forward on this one. So we'll come back to standardized naming conventions, but let's talk about annual reporting and work plans, as this has been already brought up. So the report recommended that for each group, that the city requires having an annual report and an annual plan potentially. And I want to take those individually. The first question is should all governance groups be required to have an annual report to council? So that is one I would bring forward here. And then second to that, should all governance groups be required to develop an annual work plan? And this one I think is an interesting one, because obviously the work of every governance group is very different. And so some groups, an annual work plan might be highly appropriate for some, less appropriate for others. So this might be one where we instead have to go, instead of making a blanket rule, go group by group to decide who needs to have an annual work plan. But I wanted to bring forward both of those questions. So let's start on the annual report. Is this something that this group would be interested in saying, yes, we want to make sure that we get an annual report from every one of these groups?
With the caveat that not every annual report is of the same sophistication, like, because it might be a memo. That could be your annual report if it's, say, the CATC or something, or some group that just has maybe a limited range or limited things that they do. That could be just a very simple, and I just don't want the term report to be a burden. It could be just a summary of, like, these are the cases we reviewed, if it's the police review or whatever. And this was the outcome or something, it doesn't have to be a published glossy bound document.
It doesn't have to be a 17-page presentation.
Right. But yes, I think every group should give us, that's my take, is every group should have to give us something.
I agree.
And sometimes I struggle with the fact that we can't always keep up with some of the boards and commission changes, like, oh, there's 3 openings, and there's 4 openings, and we try to meet, and then we try to, get that. I almost would appreciate if those reports could come back with, we had 12 meetings, or we only had, we were scheduled for 12, but we were only able to have 5 meetings because we couldn't keep a quorum. Or, that kind of information is helpful as a committee, like, then see how effective that committee has been able to be. I guess is the question. I'm trying to understand if they would need additional support or somehow make some changes.
I don't know, Annie, if you're covering this in a future slide, but are we going to be drilling down more into any recommendations for what should be included in annual reports in this meeting?
Now's the time if we want to talk about that. So this is great opening.
Well, to Chris's point, all of the, no two committees are exactly alike. So I am wary of creating blanket requirements, like every annual report must include such and such. There are a number of committees where outreach with the community is really important, like the Human Rights Commission, the Library Advisory Board. There are a handful of committees where I feel that an important part of their work is making sure that the community knows they exist and that they're interested in their feedback. So to the extent that it would make sense for the annual reports to perhaps have language like, please describe what, if any, outreach efforts you engaged in this year and the results of that outreach work, for example. So, and you can, the comma, if any, is kind of like your get out of jail free card if need be, because yeah, for some committees are more internal facing and that's not as appropriate, but for some, if people, I used to serve on Community Police Review Board, and I got the impression a lot of folks didn't know that we had a complaint process because we received so few complaints. So it's like, well, even the world's greatest police department is going to
Have complaints.
It's just guaranteed, so I was just surprised that we had so few. So anyway, the merits is a whole other question. I'm just saying any organization that size is guaranteed to generate complaints no matter whether they're relevant or not. So anyway, but I'm not sure how exactly to incorporate that because it might not be something that should be mandatory. But I do feel it would be important for some of the groups like library, public art, Community Police Review Board. If I have a whole list in front of me, I could probably identify the other ones, Parks and Rec, and so on. But yeah, but again, we want to avoid a one size fits none situation too.
Would that be primarily in the bylaws, saying that committees, if they're a public facing committee or if their purpose is to engage with the public, I don't know if that would be in bylaws or in rules or if that would be asked.
My thinking is most of this is gonna be in code and.
Okay.
As far as like, that sort of thing, it would be as applicable.
Yeah, as applicable.
And if you're not getting one and you want one, then I guess it's applicable, so.
Did that clear it up?
Yes, that's very helpful. So what I'm hearing is that we're interested in creating a framework that's flexible enough that it's not going to be onerous for any particular group. We're going to have to take into account the fact that some of these groups have different areas of focus, but I can imagine something like summary of work, summary of community outreach efforts, if applicable. I do think number of meetings where quorum was or was not able to be achieved. I think that's a really helpful one. Is there anything else like that you definitely would want to be hearing from every group in terms of the information that you would want to see to know, yes, this group is, functioning effectively and performing the role that we want it to be performing?
I think one thing that that might be important, but again, I don't know where it would fit in, is if any have a strategic plan. If any, if some of the boards or commissions have a strategy as they move through their year or their 5-year, because I think a lot of times they may feel like they don't know where they're going, and certainly if they don't, we don't. But I know that won't apply to all, but I think it can apply to some. And so and that may be more staff liaison driven in the sense of, is that something that's needed? And that's what I don't know.
And this kind of gets to the second question here is, do we want them to be developing annual work plans that might help support, if they did have a strategic plan in place or some of these other pieces. Is this something that we want to see from all groups, from some groups? I'm curious if there's any thoughts on that kind of requirement.
I'd offer, it might go back, Mayor, to what you said earlier. I think about the Human Rights Commission absolutely benefits when they do a strategic work plan. It focuses. The Municipal Court Judge Compensation Commission has a particular
Yeah,
objective. They come, they do it, they leave for a couple of years. That doesn't strike me as needing a strategic plan.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue it.
Some of them are reactionary type groups. They respond to whatever comes to them.
Incident comes in.
And some are more proactive, so that then they can actually plan their work.
Right, yeah.
I think one thing would be good to build into this, Rose, is maybe the ability for this committee to oversee that stuff a little bit, so we can adjust, so we don't have to take it to the whole council or whatever every time we want, maybe something's not working. But give enough flexibility in however we set this up, so this group can help guide that work in terms of the plans or the, whatever the requirements.
Could this group guide the boards and commissions developments of the work plans?
No.
Thank you.
No.
Consent too.
No. Whether or not they need one.
Okay.
We do not want to get involved in each one of the committees.
Subject to Annie correcting me, I think, Annie Rose correcting me, I think the idea would be to come up with a proposed language and bring it back.
Yeah, but I mean, ongoing, maybe we decide hey, this isn't working, or yeah, we required this upfront, but we really don't need it,
That's another slide coming up.
Okay, great.
Hey.
Oh, see, now you're.
You're teaching us ahead.
Oh.
Amy, I just want to underscore a few things. In the annual reports and or work plans, for some of these committees, I would love to see, if applicable, right, which is just kind of a great catch-all provision. Did you do outreach to youth specifically? That's something we've talked a lot about at the boards and commission committee meetings, where it's we would really love to have more of a youth involvement in this particular committee. Not useful for the Judicial Compensation Committee, great shout out. I had totally forgot about that when I served on that one too, 8 years ago or something like that. So youth engagement, also, not just community outreach, but community outreach to underserved communities. That can become particularly important for, again, I'm thinking Police Review Board and HRC, for example. So, that's where, having some questions that touch on what are you doing to be equitable in your work? And then in terms of performance metrics implies that they're creating data. And again, not every committee creates data. So perhaps a gentler question that gets to the same concept is, what are you proudest of this year? Something that allows them to, again, feel, ownership. Yeah, we did this thing. We're really proud of it. We hosted a summit. We did this in this park or what have you. So maybe if we're not asking for performance metrics per se, but we could ask, what are your greatest accomplishments this year? And another thing, and again, this could risk opening a can of worms, so I don't know whether we want to include this or not. Do you want council direction on anything? Fill in the blank or whatever. Do we want to open that can of worms? I don't know. But do we want to say, do they want more interaction with us? Because I know sometimes we can't be everywhere at once. We can't liaise to every single committee, board, and task force or advisory group. So now that's what I'm not necessarily committed to. I just want to throw it out since we're discussing it.
We'll all have staff liaisons. And so I would think that the staff liaison would be the person that they would most likely ask, do we need
That's true.
council, I'm not sure it would need to in their annual report, I just think that there's a staff that would help them through that process.
I kind of agree with Councilor Nordick in the sense that there may be some issues out there for a particular board or commission that they're unsure what the city's position on it is, and it might be good to get feedback from council on it. So if they can identify that in an annual report,
And do you want that or not? Because sometimes those issues can be complicated and tricky.
Yeah. But they're delegated for a reason.
Unless we say no, do you want our feedback?
Well, and that's why it's like with some of these, I've gone to like having council liaisons, like a council liaison to Sprout.
And to Downtown Advisory.
To
Board.
DAB, so they have some sort of point of contact, but yet
They don't use me much.
more of a soft touch. Yeah,
No.
but that's fine.
And,
Yeah.
so, it's kind of interesting. Because when I was on it, I was frustrated that I didn't see counselors very often. And yet, now that I'm there, they just kind of ignore me and go on with their business. How dare them?
But I think
Don't you know
Sprout,
who I am?
I think Mickey's very involved with Sprout. I think it varies by group.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and by group and maybe how one goes into it now.
Anyway,
I love how interconnected all of these topics are, because liaison roles or council liaison roles is another upcoming topic, not for today,
Oh,
but
we're
for
just
the next work
anticipating.
session as well. I know this you're anticipating all the pieces. Okay, so the things that I'm hearing on this is that our team will go away and come back to you all with basic a draft of what an annual report requirements could look like. We'll also look at the list to see if we can help identify which of these groups we think it might make sense for work plans to be required of, and we can bring that list back to you all as well. Anything else on this topic before I move us to the next one?
I don't think so.
Okay, well then I'm gonna go back one slide. We did want to talk about standardized naming conventions, and honestly, I don't know how much value there is in spending too much time on this one, but it came up, so bringing it up here. Right now, there are general trends around how things are named, but there are still kind of outlying groups in terms of where some of these names come from. So one question for this is it worthwhile putting in the effort to create a common set of naming conventions for governance groups? I have included on this slide an example of municipal definitions that we've seen in other cities. Now, I will say I've done a lot of research on this. There is no set standard for exactly that is, nationwide around how to call and how to define each one of these groups. So what the definitions that we have up here are standard ones that we've seen in many other cities, but they are by no means the end all be all. They do not match how the city currently has this set up, and that is fine as well. I think the goal here would just be whatever definition we agree on, that could be used consistently. So oftentimes what we'll see is that a board is really an oversight of a very particular entity, like a library board. Commission is often a group that has both advisory responsibilities, but has some type of regulatory or oversight responsibilities. For example, when you have a planning commission that has authority to make decisions on development proposals, I would say is the most kind of classic version of that. Committees are often ones that are advisory in nature and part of a larger group. So like the subcommittees coming off of council, and then task force is often used for ad hoc work. So again, this is not the list. This is not exactly how this is set up currently within Salem. Right now, I think that you use the term commission most frequently to stand in for the definition of what we have up here for committee, which is really all of those advisory groups. Right now, committee is mostly reserved for groups that have council members as the primary folks who are part of those committees. And then in the world of task force, I think this is where it gets a little hairy. We have a lot of different names that sometimes gets used: steering committees, advisory groups, task forces, those types of things. And I think also the board naming, there's not a total clarity right now around sort of how and what makes something a board versus a commission, for example. So first and foremost, is there interest in pursuing setting a standardized structure for how these groups should be named and specific definitions for what each name means?
For me, I don't find a lot of value in spending much time on this.
I just have a couple thoughts, and I generally agree with you. To me, the way I've always looked at it is board and commission are pretty much synonymous, but I agree with the way it's kind of defined in here. I don't think it really matters for us. Committee, however, to me, is specific to a council subcommittee.
Yeah.
And that has some bearing on us, because in the charter and in the council rules, the mayor has specific authority to appoint to committees. whereas boards or commissions are kind of guided by, resolution or ordinance. So I would like to define these pretty much as Annie Rose has set out here, but I want to make specific that a committee is a council subcommittee, and it may include private parties, other people that would be appointed, but it's going to the councilors.
Sure,
Fine.
whatever. That sounds great.
Great.
I don't have a strong opinion, can you tell?
It gets kind of convoluted when we're trying to figure out who gets to appoint who. So
It
make
makes
sure we're
sense to
clear
me.
on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I trust your judgment, Kevin.
So it sounds like we don't want to spend time here. We can look at boards and commissions, knowing that we're going to kind of use those interchangeably. We can create the definition for committees so that everybody's on the same page, and potentially use task force to denote when it is a time limited group rather than standing.
That sounds good.
Great. Great. I'm going to move us right along then. All right, the second to last topic we have here for you today is around a review process. So this was actually a suggestion that was brought up by quite a few people during the interview process, which was saying, we don't look at our governance groups on a regular basis. There isn't a set process to say, we're looking at all of these groups to check, do they still make sense? Are they still relevant for the city? Are there changes that need to be made? That type of thing. So the recommendation was focused on developing a process to just standardize that work. Right now it is done in a pretty organic manner, and this would say, no, we'll have a general process where council or a group like this committee would be reviewing all of the governance groups holistically. And so a couple of the questions that this raises for this group is, do you think a standardized review process would be beneficial? If so, how often might it occur? An annual process might be too frequent of a process for this work. Another question that comes up here is, oftentimes this work is done to make sure that these groups, that they are not, every single group takes a huge amount of staff time to support. So this is really making sure, are these groups actually giving us the most value possible? But another piece that can be considered is, do we need additional and new groups? And should that conversation be brought into this process as well? So I'm going to start right at the top. Do we think that there is a need for a regular review process? Would this be beneficial?
Yes. From my perspective, I think we need to take affirmative steps to just make sure that things are still relevant and that we're still getting the value and that it's worth the staff time that we're investing. Because like you said, these take a lot of staff time.
Yeah.
One thought that I had is that as part of the annual report, that I wouldn't want the Board of Commission to answer the question, are we still relevant?
Yeah.
But that could be something that would be part of council's sort of review as they receive that report.
Annually seems too much though.
Yeah,
It seems too often.
it would be sort of an ad hoc thing as for the annual reports, but a periodic review, a small version of this once every 5 years.
Yeah, five sounds like a decent. And
Or maybe periodic, just say, and so it's more flexible, but then maybe it doesn't get done if we don't.
It's once every 20 years like we're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But also, do we want them all done at once? I mean, because that's a workload then when that cycle comes up, so.
well, doing it, selecting 5 years and maybe having it rotating.
Yeah, do a couple a year.
Yeah, exactly, I don't know how many boards, commissions, and committees and task force we would be going through, but
Well, maybe we just give that direction to Annie Rose, say, yes, we want to review them. No, we don't want to do it every year. Can you come up with something, come up with a better idea?
maybe, but spread it out, so maybe it's not, 15 in 1 year, every 5 years, it's, 5 a year over 5 years' time.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things that we've seen is you can put in a more formal structure that says whether that's every 5 years or what have you on this rolling basis. As the reports come in, you're going to review it, but you can also build in informally, because this naturally happens. If you're getting that annual report every year, there can be informal conversations that come up around, if this group failed to meet quorum for 50% of their meetings last year, maybe that's a sign that we need to revisit this. So we can also think about how we could add in some flexibility to say, as needed, if these items come up more frequently, great, but at least once every 5 years, all of these groups are getting looked at. So we can figure out the language that might go there.
Just anecdotally, when I was at the Oregon State Bar, our Oregon New Lawyers Division hadn't undergone a review in at least 20 years. And a lot of their bylaws were, it was so out of date that going to their leadership and saying that we need to, at that point, it was basically an overhaul was needed. There were so many things that were just no longer applicable. And it took a good year, and there was a little bit of belly aching from them as well. But it was also because no one had ever, they were basically, it's almost like, the kids' table at Thanksgiving. They get their own little fold up table. Maybe they don't get the nice glassware, that sort of thing, maybe the paper plates and such. Well, that's kind of like, it kind of felt like that. They were kind of left to their own devices. And we, the board of governors, we'd like to hold, what are you guys doing with this budget we give you? And what are your performance metrics? And they've never been asked that before. So I think creating that expectation, there's a diplomatic way of doing that. And that's an example of waiting too long to have that kind of review. But by the end of the year, they were fully on board and they were excited and they were very proud of all the changes and updates that they had made. But it was a little bit grueling at first because no one had ever approached them and held them accountable, really. So it ended up being really effective. But in other words, don't wait 20 years. I think 5 years is a good ballpark. I would even give them, I would err to the side closer to 7 if need be. It just kind of depends on how far some of these are behind. But I like what you say, Annie, about there are some yellow flags in terms of who might be overdue for a review. And the failure to meet quorum on the regular is one of those flags for sure. So.
And Annie, would it also be possible to put in triggers that would start a review process or notify the council? For example, if X board or commission fails to meet quorum more than 3 times, it triggers a report to council or it triggers a review process for that specific board or commission. And you could have other triggers that could be set in other ways.
Yeah, I'm thinking that this is something that we could even bring into the annual report itself. So any of those potential trigger items, we'd want the groups to be reporting on so that that could sort of naturally be part of that process. Because I do think quorum's the most obvious one that comes to mind, but there have been some others. This was an example of.
Hasn't met in a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any groups that need that right
Used
here?
to.
Mm-hmm. I think too, the most common one that we see as well is things to do with scope. So either if a new group has come in and there's an overlap in scope, that can be a big trigger point for that. Or if the group is not fulfilling on a primary element of its scoped authority or its scoped delegated piece of work that it has been put in charge of. So I think that we could build those pieces in and we could include them in the annual reports, and then they would naturally then trigger some of those other pieces in terms of the review
I
process.
think we'd want to be careful with canceled meetings because of quorum, because
Sometimes it's our fault.
you said.
Yeah. Well, ours being canceled because we either try to mess with the process or we haven't appointed people.
Yeah, and then sometimes it just happens too.
And sometimes
A
it's not-
5-person board and 2 of them quit.
Right.
Becomes hard.
But that can be noted in the annual report. That could be.
Yeah, we're obviously not gonna get rid of the planning commission, but yet they haven't met quorum a bunch of times this year, but it's almost all been our fault.
But I could also see if we have a hard time getting people to volunteer for a board.
Yep.
Because they don't do anything.
Right,
That could be a reason to get rid of it.
absolutely. Okay,
Great. All right. Any last pieces on review process? Okay, then the last piece that I want to bring forward here is that there were several groups as part of the assessment that were identified as needing potentially either further review, consolidation, dissolution. Since the report, a couple of these groups have either, we have identified that they have actually formally closed out, or they have restarted. So you're not going to see a one-to-one match today between what I'm sharing and what is in the report, because there has been some changes since then. But there were two groups that were flagged as part of this, as the first one is potential combination. So all of the urban renewal advisory boards were flagged as, could we bring all of these boards together into one rather than having three separate boards? And the community police review board was flagged as, I think it was already mentioned, since this group has not necessarily reviewed a complaint since 2015, what does that look like? Do we need to adjust their scope? We know that there's quite a lot of work happening there. So I have more context on both of those that I would like to share. But in general, the question for you all is, once I share this, is this enough information? Would you need other information to think about whether we actually want to recommend any of these changes to the groups? So with that, the additional piece that I want to share first on the Urban Renewal Advisory Board piece is that I reached out to Kristen Rutherford to get her take on the situation as well, since she and her staff are the primary liaisons for this group, really involved in this work. And she was in favor of potential consolidation here. Primarily because these boards have had a very long history of it being challenging to recruit and fill vacancies. So this is one of those examples where it has been tough to get people in the door for this type of work. We also know that at least for the North of the Gateway URA and the West Salem URA, they are both approaching maximum indebtedness in the next 4 years, which means that they will be headed toward closure. So as new URAs are being considered, it might be very beneficial to have that singular advisory board that is made up of citywide representation, especially as we're bringing new URAs online. There would certainly be staffing efficiencies that would be gained by having one group rather than three. And they do have an idea, her team has an idea of how this could potentially be structured if we did want to move toward a merged group that I could certainly bring to this group as well. So based on that very, very high level information, I'm curious if there are thoughts from this group about that potential combination, if you have other questions, if there's other information that would be beneficial as thinking through if this is something that we want to recommend.
Supportive of exploring combining those for sure.
Same.
Yeah, I'm just curious what her feeling was on the Downtown Advisory Board, because they also have the parking budget, they have some other issues. So I don't know if her recommendation was to keep that one separate and then the others merge, because I could see where there would be maybe some and like some things with Downtown Advisory Board that aren't necessarily appropriate with the other urban renewal.
Yes, that's a great question. I believe the goal would be to keep the Downtown Advisory Board separate to this and just bring together the other, the three additional advisory boards listed here. So on that front, does this group need additional information, or would this be something that, as long as we can work with Kristen and the rest of her team, that this is something that we could bring forward as a recommendation?
Well, I think you could bring it forward with a recommendation. I would like to, I would want to know what their suggestions are on how we could, what it would look like going forward and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think you definitely start that work. That's my take on it. I'm hearing nods and seeing nods.
Yeah, I think we're.
Sounds good.
Great.
This is one, these particular groups are ones where we have such prescribed membership criteria that it's extremely difficult to fill them. And the other thing, I understand why they were created the way they were, but really these, even though they are specific to a limited geographic area, they have citywide implications.
Yeah.
They all do on our revenue and all sorts of things citywide. And so it's not really something that is so limited to just that geographic area. So I think we could be well served by a larger group, one larger group.
Yes, I agree.
I would agree. I mean, considering a lot of the ordinance is about bringing people who are not in those geographic areas to those areas, I mean.
Yeah.
It's not as necessary to have that geographic restriction.
And really hard to fill.
Really.
Yeah.
Really hard to fill.
That's what these three are probably what we struggle with the most on this group, trying to find people to fit those very
Yeah.
specific pigeonholes.
Great. All right. Well, then we will move forward with getting that recommendation put together. So the other piece on here, and I may ask Gretchen also to speak to this one as well, the Community Police Review Board came up as part of the assessment. And that was really primarily because as originally scoped, the idea behind this group is that they would be reviewing complaints. That's a primary element of what they are scoped to do, although their scope is broader than just that piece. This group has not reviewed a complaint since 2015, since no complaints have come through this process as part of this work. And so right now, our understanding is that the group is really focusing on some other areas as well in terms of its full scope so that we can be using that group effectively. So staff, this is the language from the report itself, that we know that staff have reported they're actively working to engage this group in other activities that fall within their scope. So we wanted to highlight that here. Gretchen, what else would you add to that conversation?
Oh, sure. I guess to clarify, I think complainants really have three places to go. Don't you think, Counselor, after they feel unresolved at the police department? You know, complaints begin at the PD, and I do spend a lot of time assisting people in that process. But then if they feel unresolved after the police department works with that individual, the Community Police Review Board is one, but there's also going to risk management if you had a monetary objective, or there's lawsuit. And so I think they either resolve at the PD or they identify one of those other pathways, often is what I've seen. And you might ask, well, what the heck else do you do? We've often joked, it's like the Maytag repairman, you know, where, for those of you who are old enough to remember that commercial, but we kind of do two things. One is to be prepared in case we do get a complaint. So the members work hard at running what would the complaint process look like. The other thing is and learning about topics that are likely to generate a complaint, like maybe excessive use of force or procedures for cuffing, for example. The second category of what they do is around providing community input into policy. The team has been bringing information about, oh, here's area of policy and procedure and benefiting from dialogue with the community members and the staff. So we've been basically focusing in those two areas while we await complaints. So if that helps with extra context.
As I understand the situation, the policy, the internal procedure was changed a number of years ago, which changed it to so where we wouldn't really have much opportunity for complaints to come forward out of the PD to this group. And that's what cut the workload.
Oh, that's interesting. That might predate me. The bylaws were last amended in 2010 and I came on in 2013. So that's a good point. I know that we step one is for the police department to review the complaint.
Sure.
Because we don't have capacity ourselves to do that independently. So we have the police do it. But sometimes people want to work through me to have that happen. So I'll do some shuttle diplomacy or assist that person, you know, hear them, take info to police will clarify things, I'll bring back. So I certainly assist in that sometimes, but step one is that. Then if the person feels unresolved after the police's investigation, then they have the option to come to us. So that might have been what you're referring to.
Yeah.
But
I guess my way of looking at this is I'm not comfortable sunsetting it necessarily. But yet I think a revamp or somehow we need to make it relevant and not what it is currently. I feel like it's not very relevant right now. People had come onto that with one expectation and then we sort of do a bait and switch.
Yeah, I'm even looking Community Police Review Board. It's like, should we change the name?
Right.
Should we change the name that indicates a scope of duties?
What they actually, I just think a review and update of all of that would be really appropriate.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, I was trying to find on my resume when I served on CPRB because it was a while ago. So I might be able to find it in a second. What I recall at the time, yes, you start your complaint with the police department and they prepare a response. And if they're dissatisfied with it, they could essentially appeal
Yeah.
to the CPRB.
Yeah.
And we had, I think, maybe 2 complaints in my tenure on CPRB. I remember one for sure. And part of the frustration from my end, we obviously heard from the complainant, but the officer did not have to attend and was advised not to attend. And that really undercut the meaningfulness of that process. It's like, what do you mean you don't have to be here? So that was unfortunate. And I think that you know, certainly impacted, in my opinion, the fairness of the proceeding. And I ultimately left CPRB because after that, like Gretchen said, we would continue to meet like clockwork, even though we had no official complaint to discuss. And yes, we would just go over procedures. We would hear from the police's perspective every single time. We were never hearing from the community's perspective. So it's almost like getting one side's argument and perspective over and over again. And so that also, I feel like, impacted the impartiality of the police review board, because we're only hearing from the police officers who are particularly good at engaging with civilians and explaining their work. And they're good at their job, which is great. So I think you could look at other police review boards from other comparable cities for guidance. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. In fact, I had a law student do a little research, and she compared the bylaws for our police review board to others and sent me a little memo, which I think I may have actually already forwarded to Moss Adams. Yeah, she's nodding. It was great to kind of nerd out and do a deeper dive into that. Yeah, I think we should keep it, but I think it does need some restructuring to stay relevant for sure. And it's just one more example. I remember our department took a lot of heat during the social justice, the George Floyd protests, the Proud Boys, et cetera. They took a lot of heat for that. And I thought, okay, someone is going to complain. Someone is going to make it to the CPRB, not one. And I was just like, this is I hadn't seen our police department come under such scrutiny in a long time. And I was surprised that even during that process, there was not one complaint reviewed by CPRB for their handling of protests. And that surprised me. I thought, well, surely they'll get something now, but they didn't.
We certainly got those reviews at court.
Yes, you did. Yeah, and yeah, that is a very different process. I understand and I appreciate that. But yeah, if this group wants to stay relevant, there needs to be another way, sure. For those who don't have a monetary incentive, as Gretchen so diplomatically put it. So.
And I think Gretchen has mentioned this previously, but doing something like compelling an officer to testify and appear at a CPRB is going to be a bargaining issue.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm sure it would be.
Okay. So do you have-
2013 to 2014, that's when I served. Sorry,
We
I
overlapped
apologize.
a
I
bit.
finally found it. Yeah.
Do you have what you need from us, Andy Rose?
I do. What I'm hearing is that there's an interest in revisiting this, and this very well may be a scoping piece rather than to really identify what all is this group doing as well, so that we can make sure that the scope is fully speaking to all the elements that they can be bringing to the table and make sure that they're as relevant as possible. So we will work on some of those pieces moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was the last piece that I had for you all today. In terms of our next steps, we have an October work session with you, and we're going to be going through some of the other pieces. So we'll be bringing back some information that we discussed today, some of those recommendations. We're going to be looking at the council liaison assignment framework, some initial questions there, and then really focusing in on initial discussion of eligibility requirements and the application process are both going to be incorporated into into that session as well. And then we have at least 2 more sessions as needed to wrap up all of the pieces that are coming out from that. But after the October session, you'll have basically all the pieces on the table that this group is going to be discussing. Any questions for me on that front?
Yeah, I think we have one.
So Annie Rose, so expectations of when all of these updates and changes will be like finalized that the council votes on? A timeline on that?
So we're hoping that by end of year, we'll be able to bring at least some of these items forward for council vote. So end of year or very beginning of next year. But I think if we can move at the clip we're moving today, I anticipate and hope that we would be able to bring at least some of these items forward to full council approval.
Okay, so I'm gonna approach, and this will be something that I've been thinking about just because of some recent incidences. I was hoping that maybe we could hear what your updates and recommendations would be on the current application and selection process specifically for planning commission. If we could have that before end of year, I would like to see that. Just to see how that might look, how that committee process the applications. And as you heard, or at least Colleen did, the struggle that we have with these applications is too often people apply for every single board and commissions that is on the list, even if there's no vacancies. And then that pulls in questions that have no application to some of the committees that they're applying for. And it gets really frustrating trying to understand that applicant and their potential abilities, and if they even meet some of the requirements that are needed in specific committees or commissions or boards. And I also get very frustrated when they don't even know what ward they're in. And that may be a very important aspect as we try to diversify the boards and commissions to have representation from not just Ward 2 or whatever ward we might be in. So I was hoping that we might see those updates before the end of the year so that we could make decisions on those soon. Thank you.
Great.
I don't know.
We can,
I guess
as
no one
part of
else has
our-
any comments.
no, but that's very helpful. So as part of our work next time when we're talking about general eligibility requirements and application process, I'll be sure to make sure that we're looking at the Planning Commission in particular for that work as well.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Do
you
have
so
anything else
much.
for us? All right. thank
That
you for
was
being
it.
here. All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care, Rose.
Thank you.
you.
We will move on to vacancies on Citizen Budget Committee and then also Citizens Advisory Traffic Commission.
So, this is gonna go pretty quickly. Mr. Mayor, I think that you kind of have a pretty good sense of this, so excuse me, Counselor, if you'd like to look at packets, there's the Citizen Budget Committee and CATSI. I'll pull them up very quickly here, where you have your Citizen Budget Committee. There's not a whole lot to do here. You've got 3 folks who have been requesting reappointment. Excuse me, the purple's hard to read, but that says June 30th, for a little bit now. And they are in wards 4, 7, and 5. You have no applicants from Ward 7, and these are the only applicants, excuse me, from Ward 4, and these are the only applicants from Wards 5 and 7. So you can choose to reappoint or replace William Dixon and Dr. Brown, but there is no applicant for Ward 4 for Andrew Cohen.
Well, I have no problem recommending reappointment of Cohen or Dixon, but I think for Dr. Brown, we have to reappoint because he's gonna be joining us on council, and I don't see a lot of value in keeping him on that between now and then when we could be onboarding a new Ward 5 person.
The only challenge with that is so far he has requested reappointment.
When did he make that request, though?
He made that request after he was elected, after the primary.
And I've chatted with him since, and so far he has not resigned. I told him that we would be making decisions today. And we would need his decision to resign by today in order to appoint somebody, and he did not submit.
So we have an upcoming budget meeting October 30th.
Yeah,
And we have a new applicant that's Ward 5, but that just came in, it was double. Well, we've looked at Taryn, I mean, we haven't been able to appoint, but he's had his application in for a while. There isn't anything preventing us from waiting until November.
And you have appointment committee dates on November 7th?
well, except that we have a meeting in October where we're starting the ball rolling for the next budget cycle.
Do you feel then that a new person would have to be at that one?
No, I mean, they can, if they're not on the, I mean.
Yeah.
No, there are no have tos. Could you scroll up, Dan, please? Thanks.
We did get Evelyn applied yesterday and she's in Ward 8, unfortunately. So that's the most recent applicant. Unless you want to kick David Gear off.
No.
So the at-large position must be either Julie Curtis
It's
or
Julie.
William Dixon.
Julie, I believe. is
Oh, there it
at
is, at-large, got it. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to remember.
Well, I'm not quite sure what to do about urban in the situation. I feel like I mean, ideally, the new person should be appointed so they can attend the October 30th meeting. This is, it's a committee where there's a pretty steep learning curve. It's not like just waltzing into some of the other ones. So can you talk to him, Chris? Is that possible? Really?
Yeah.
Oh my, well.
Well, several people were new, we've had, 3 or 4 newbies that walked in January of this year.
Mhm.
And we had Evan, Nick, Evan, and I thought there was one more,
Who's appointed in 20
Stacy.
Evan and David were both appointed in 24.
Do we have
Nick,
we don't have a boards and commissions meeting before October 30th?
you have an appointment
Yeah,
committee meeting, October 21st,
okay, so we have another opportunity.
November 7th,
Okay,
November 25th, and December 10th. We have 4 more of these
Okay.
coming up before the end of the year.
but before that next budget committee meeting, we do have another meeting. That was my cue.
Correct, and
So-
you have 3 after that budget committee as
Okay.
well.
3 more afterwards.
I would propose, and I know staff will not like me saying this out loud. I would propose we hold off until our October 21st meeting to try to resolve this, so we can then appoint. I want to honor his decision, but I also agree with Vanessa.
For the other two, though, I think Andy and Bill will wanna know. Can't we just appoint them? Because I don't think we have any, I mean, there's no other
Oh, yeah.
applicants for 4.
I have no problem with that.
Can we proceed
We can,
with Bill and Andy reappointments? They both have been showing up and they've been very engaged members. So I think they would wanna know.
I'm fine with that. I will be a no on Cohen, but it's fine. 2-1 is fine.
Okay. All right.
So that's we're all in agreement on William Dixon being reappointed. And we have reappointed Andrew Cohen as well.
And we'll hold off. on
And we'll hold
work-
off on the other one.
Wonderful, thank you so much. CATSI doesn't really get much more complicated. There's 1 vacancy. We have 3 applicants and there is no comment from our liaison.
I want to advocate for Beth Schmidt.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think that just given her role in the community,
Perfect for what she's doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was when I saw this, hands down, and she has so much energy.
full disclosure, I did just meet with her right prior to this meeting on her work issues, but she did mention this to me during that meeting, and which I already knew she was an applicant, but I still think she's the exact right person for this position.
Give you
I
another
wholeheartedly
working
agree. This is right in her wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
I think we'll be better off as a community if she's participates.
Yeah.
It's great.
Perfect, that ends the boards and commissions fund.
Now we have volunteers.
So I'll take your packets if you have them. And now we're going to go to the dreaded
No.
Not dreaded, Dan.
I look forward to it.
It's not dreaded. This is the fun work.
This is the gist. This is who's been awarded for what.
Pass that.
You're gonna have a fancier.
Close the door if-
No.
close the door if we're bothering you.
He's leaving.
Good, thank you for bothering us.
We're gonna pull up our fancy schmancy version here where you get to read large swaths of language about why these individuals have been nominated. But this is just the short list of who's been nominated for what.
Thank you.
We also have, if you would like to look at the history of who's been selected, all the winners.
In the past.
It's in a little bit of a
I
difficult
think
to
that,
read
yeah, that
format.
got mailed. I think you mailed that
Yeah.
to me.
Which was great.
But we have two of these, if anybody wants to look at
Okay.
those.
Cool.
Should we just start at the top?
Well, it's a good place to begin.
Yeah.
And we know where we end.
There you go. Al Alex Business Government Partnership Award.
Yeah.
I read through this prior. It seemed like a great application.
And they were in several, they applied at different places, I believe, right?
And here are paper versions of the nominations. If you'd like.
Oh, maybe it was part.
No, I don't think this one was.
I think it was Make Music.
Yeah.
Make Music is the one.
Yeah.
Which is sort of tangentially related, but not the same.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Any other thoughts on this one?
River City Rocks.
Yeah.
I love it.
Great,
Great name anyway.
all
I
right.
like it.
Distinguished Project Award.
So many worthy
Four.
candidates,
Can
but
I see the list of prior recipients?
it's, yeah, sure, right
I
here.
was, thank you. I was thinking that we did make music recently, but maybe I just thought I wanted to check.
And
Good to know, because they would be my first choice.
I agree.
hopefully someday I'll have that in the spreadsheet that's a little bit easier to
That's
find.
It's okay.
Fine, yeah.
One time I should
Yeah,
have.
you just need a little, can you ask AI to do that for you?
Yeah, once I give them all that information, I can type it all in.
So let's see, in 2020, we don't have 2023 on here, which is distinguished. Maybe we didn't do a distinguished project.
That could be. I've only
May have
added,
skipped that year.
yeah, I simply added on to what we had last year.
There's
did.
only, there are, you know that, there's years where they're
Yeah.
reading award stuff.
They did not receive this. No, they haven't. They're not on this list for distinguished projects in the past.
They're
So
my
then,
first choice.
okay,
I agree.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Make
Make music said. Are there any others? We don't have to limit it to one. Are there
Correct.
others you'd like to consider?
You can give one to everybody if you'd like. No limit. Except for if you get to things like probably the, individual William Marshall Awards, that kind of thing, or maybe.
yeah.
I like the Canine Corps, the 750 plus friendly dog visitation program.
I like that one too.
I think that's a nice addition.
Yeah.
What if we do two?
Yeah, let's do this too.
I can also pull up what we did last year and look, I'm sure that there's some.
I don't remember that.
We didn't do that award last year.
Yeah.
Okay. I just looked.
That's what you were just talking about, okay.
Yep.
And no one fit in the Dorothy,
Nobody was nominated for that one.
yeah. I think part of it didn't.
We extended the deadline, so.
Several times. You're also empowered to move people around, so if you'd
Yeah.
like to give somebody the Dorothy Patch Award, you can.
Hmm.
Next is outstanding city advisory, et cetera, et cetera.
I think Carly's amazing.
I do too.
That's a great choice.
I agree.
I have no problem with that.
Great.
Okay, outstanding neighbor.
I loved the Fairmont Emergency Readiness Team. I think that's great.
And I suggested to Shannon at Cessna to recommend a Celeste, because she does such a nice job on the home improvement awards that they do, but it doesn't mean that she can't be nominated.
I don't think I read that one. Tell me more about that.
So what she has done for years is they have it's kind of like the beautification home award, where she goes and takes pictures of a house that's getting refurbished your remodel that someone in their neighborhood is fixing up, and then they invite that homeowner to come and receive a gift and be acknowledged for the work. And so they actually have a little award ceremony, but they recommend, like, here are these 3 houses. And it's always so nice. And Celeste does such a great job. I think she's been doing it for a number of years. And so I suggested to Shannon, Chair of Cessna. And so she did that. Doesn't mean that she can't be nominated again next year. So I just want, and I'm also very strong in support of the FERT program. It's great. They just had their annual fair, encouraging any neighbors to join. It's such a great program, and both Vanessa and I are trying to encourage our other neighborhoods to do something similar. And
Yeah, I think
it's not easy.
No, yeah,
No,
that's,
it's
no, I think
not
this is great.
easy. So I think promoting them and giving them an award, that will show another example of what great service that is. So I'm all for that.
Great.
Well, I was the one who nudged the folks
Chris.
to nominate first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Great.
yeah, I'm on 100% agreement, and I'm in support of giving an award to Celeste as well.
I agree.
Oh, we can do both?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Most
I
of
thought
these
we-
awards
I thought
you
that they
can.
were, they had to
There's
go up
one or
against each
two.
other. But
No,
anyway, it's a really,
Two is fine.
it's really a nice program that's been done, and it
Yeah.
makes them feel more community oriented. You
Great.
know, like they're recognizing their neighbors right there.
Love it.
Yeah, most of these awards, it's acceptable to have multiple. There's one or two where for the prestige of it, it's kind of nice to have just the one, so.
Okay, well, thank you.
For now,
That's
and then do
great.
this.
And part of the reason when you asked me to nominate FERT, I'm going, I already nominated somebody, so I didn't feel that
It's all good.
that I should, so.
It's all good. I'm just happy that, and this will help give them a little more visibility too.
Yes.
Now we have Salem Spirit
Yeah.
Award.
Salem Spirit, I'm sorry, that I can make.
No, it's
bigger.
fine. It's fine. I just
Now we have
refresh my
music
memory.
here again.
Yes,
This is where Make Music, yeah.
yes, make
Salem.
music is, I don't wanna.
It was another
Go back
entry.
This one, I was a little bit, I wish we knew a little bit more about this street cleanup, that it was just kind of a copy of an email. It was a
Mhm.
thank you note. I wish they would have spent a little bit more energy in the nomination, because I don't know what this person does. So, yeah, I'm comfortable, very comfortable with Brian Hart and the Make Music Salem.
Well, didn't we make music?
Or is that two different ones?
We did, but you could choose, you could move
We've
them.
already given Make Music.
Distinguished and Canine Corpse gets distinguished.
What do you give them?
You gave them distinguished and canine, like Dan's.
Oh, then no, we don't need that twice.
Unless you want to move them to spirit.
Correct. Alternatively, yeah, if you just wanted to move them to spirit.
Yeah, I don't care either way. Project, I would call it a project.
Yeah.
It maybe fits better under Salem Spirit.
I think it does too.
Yes.
Now that I see that on here.
Can we do both then, Brian, and Make Music, or only one?
No, we would do,
Both.
yeah, we could do it.
I would do both.
So
And then-
we won't do Make
We'll
Music
keep
under
it
the project.
All right.
I think that's a better fit for them.
Wonderful.
You're doing Brian and Make Music.
Brian Make Music for Salem Spirit, and we're removing Make Music from Distinguished Project.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.
And
On
Vern Miller.
to the Vern Miller Award.
Now, that's when we like to do one award. Am I right? on
Yes.
that?
Yes,
That's
and
what I
then we
thought
have
so.
one individual with a couple of nominations.
Yes,
Bob Calloway.
two people, two
Yeah.
different.
Two different people nominated the same person for the same award.
Yeah.
Which is a good sign.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I can make these bigger.
No, it's fine.
Like,
I don't mind walking around.
I've read through all of them.
I did too, I was trying to refresh. my
Yeah,
memory.
yeah. But this was the one I thought, okay, there's two nominations, same person.
I liked Bob and Linda were my two standouts on this one.
One more at the bottom that I can't put on the screen.
That's fine. I think a library volunteer, over 20 years volunteering at the library is amazing.
That is a tough call.
Yeah,
I would say for Ms. Byerly that she's been a thorn in my side for many years in a good way.
it's Linda Beerley, I think she would be amazing.
I can also point out there's no one nominated on Willard Marshall.
Yes.
And I wonder if you like both, maybe one fits for.
During a
Marshall.
given year, one's more long-term and one's a given year.
I think you can certainly
But we could,
give that both out. I think you can.
you wanna do that?
I'm just looking for them to see which one I think would be a better fit for Willie Marshall versus Vern Miller.
You also have at your service award with Mr. Calloway.
Yeah, he was listed.
Twice.
Oh, okay. Well, let's do Linda Barely for Vern Miller.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
Like that.
Absolutely, you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine with me, yeah. I only emailed the ones left in the interaction.
And then Willard Marshall, we don't have anybody at this point nominated. Okay,
Correct.
all right. Lisa Letney, looks like we have one person nominated 3 times. That's a pretty good sign,
Let's see, who did we select?
and that's an amazing program.
Yeah, it's a good choice.
3 different names for her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
3
it's the
different,
same human.
it's all the same person.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
which is funny.
They all
Yeah.
just, yeah, that'd be great.
And then James Calloway, which is Bob, we've already done something. for
James
him.
Calloway for active service.
So,
You haven't already done something for him.
But do you
No,
want, you wanna make him at
correct.
your service?
Yeah.
oh,
Correct.
I thought we had.
Yeah.
I thought,
We decided not to.
I think
Oh,
you
oh.
mentioned that you could. But now we're there to do it.
okay. Oh, I see, yes, so that's, yes, okay.
You just scroll
And I
through.
don't know, Larry Eshelman is.
Yeah, can you remind me what?
That's the other one that caught my eye.
Oh, yes.
So I think this is the Larry Eshelman that used to be a partner at my husband's practice
No
and,
kidding.
and so he's,
Nice.
I don't know any other Eshelmans in town.
Up to high school.
Well, I'm in favor of giving
Yeah,
the
probably did.
two at your service awards, one to the perennial Mr. Calloway and Mr. Eshelman.
Yeah, for sure. Payment cop cars is not glamorous duty. That is not
Yeah.
glamorous duty.
I'm just talking about the cops.
It's just a public meeting.
It should be a public
Wow.
meeting because we're not supposed to tell. We're not
Um,
supposed to tell.
I know. He's blushing.
What's that?
pretty funny.
It is.
Oh, I thought we could, because we can't tell people.
We usually can't, but then this changed it.
Oh,
We
yeah.
used to be that. Okay,
Yeah.
I know.
So Mayor's Youth, you've got one nominee by the wonderful,
Gretchen
one and
Bennett.
only Gretchen Bennett.
Yeah.
That's a great choice.
Gee,
Yeah,
this is really tough too.
She knows what she's doing.
She knows, yeah.
She knows what she-
Yeah. Everyone's okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Moving on, we've only got 2 more, we're almost there. Mayor's Merit.
I will have some additional ones that are just for me on this, just FYI, but I'm fine adding these to the list too. If I decide to.
The reason I nominated Brian Sund is because he is everywhere that I go and volunteer. I mean, he's just like, what doesn't he do?
Great.
I just have been really surprised at how he is, he was at Ironman, he's always at the cemetery, he's part of the, cleanup crew there. He's always at art fair, it's just like anywhere in South Salem at least, or central South Salem, I see him.
I couldn't agree more. He's a fabulous choice for this.
Great. Yeah, the only concern I have on the next one is that we're picking out one person from this group that it's really talking about the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. It just seems like I see a lot of people involved in that.
So maybe you would feel more comfortable if the organization had been nominated.
Maybe, yeah,
perhaps.
I find it a little interesting to just single out one person because they gave one presentation to the Salem Creekside Rotary. I don't know.
And Jim
No,
Shecky worked on that a
A lot. I
That's-
see him at
that's
every
a great
event
point.
for that. So I'm a little uncomfortable with this one.
Well, let's do it just Brian then.
Yeah.
Brian's he clearly meets the criteria.
That works for me.
Brian, okay.
Yeah.
And last but not least is an internal. I didn't know this existed until this year.
We've only had it for like 2 or 3 years. This will work.
Public Works sent this to me and I had to ask if this was a thing.
Yeah.
And it's the only one nominated and it's by Brian Martin, so.
Well, that's because Richard Swires only passed, 5 years ago?
Or 4 years ago, something.
Something like that, yeah, so it's a relatively recent creation of an
Yeah.
award. He's a great guy.
2020.
He's a really delightful human being.
And if Brian thinks person is worthy of an award, then I agree.
I would, yeah.
Looks good to me. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That wraps
So
up our
what-
business.
Do you wanna bring forward what else you were?
I have a couple I'll be doing.
Oh, that we don't get to know
Mayors.
about, or that you're not gonna make public?
Correct,
Um,
but I'd be happy to share with you privately.
Can we, because we talked a lot, Dan, can you just go over I just wanna make sure I check the right boxes. I don't wanna congratulate the wrong person. You know?
I have a total of 14 awards. I've got River City Rockstar Academy for the Outlaws. I've got Canine Corps for a Distinguished Project. I've got Carly Wright at Press Play for Outstanding City Advisory Group Volunteer Award. I've got Fert and Celeste for Outstanding Neighbor. I've got Brian Hart and Nathan Salem for Salem Spirit. Linda Byerly for Vern Miller. Walt Dolores for Lisa Leddy Award.
All the ones.
James and Larry for At Your Service. Delia for Mayor's Youth. Mayor's Merit is Brian Sund and whatever's in the mayor's head. And Luke Westfall for the Reporters.
That's what I have.
Good. Thank you.
Excellent.
If you don't need your papers, you can leave them right where they are. I'll take care of them. Thank you so much. And as a reminder, we'll be meeting again at the end of October. There's a little bit of a break now. But then you're gonna have 4 meetings pretty quickly, end of October, beginning of November, mid-November, and finally on December 10th. Hopefully that will wrap up our business for the year.
Cool, well done. I know it's a lot of work.
Thank you.
to put all
What
this together.
date
Thank you.
begin, when are we having meetings?
October 21st, November 7th, November 25, and December 10. And December 10 is likely to be a little bit of a good one for boards and commissions. We have people drop off at the end of the year at 12/31, so we can address.
So
some of
you'll
that.
have a lot of work checking to see if some are reappointments and if they want to, and so
It
we'll
should,
have
it
that.
should be. Thankfully, it's not too hard these days, this thing sure helps. You just kind of glance through here and go, oh, 12th, that expires. December's, June's, just December's, yeah, it's not so bad.
Okay,
I'm gonna end our recording, because I think.
Thanks, everybody.
so